All right. Hey there, folks. Since book tour and conventions are still on somewhat of a staggered return, I figured I'd bring book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, Season 7, intriguing interviews with creative minds. And tonight's a big night for us here at the Rollercoaster, as this is our season finale. Can't believe we got here, but we're here. So for tonight's show, I wanted to spend a little time talking science as it applies to science fiction, and in particular, as it relates to Star Trek. And I couldn't think of a better way to do that than with tonight's guest, Dr. Mohamed Noor. Mohammed is a biology professor at Duke University and is contracted as a science consultant for some of the current Star Trek series. In addition to conducting research and teaching at his university, he merges his passions by teaching biology concepts using depictions from Star Trek in the classroom and writings in online videos and in-person presentations and conventions. And he is the author of the book, Live Long and Evolve, What Star Trek Teaches Us About Evolution, Genetics, and Life on Other Worlds. Welcome, Mohammed.
Thank you, Russ. It's a pleasure to be on the show, and I really appreciate you inviting me. And thank you for the very gracious introduction, too.
You got it. All right. Just a quick heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions that you have for me or Mohammed in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. Okay, as we always do, we're going to start at the beginning. So, Mohammed, where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Sydney, Australia, actually, but I did not grow up there. Didn't live there for very long at all.
Wait, so, all right, so your parents are Australian?
No, actually, my parents are Egyptian.
Shit. Oh, okay. Wow.
All over the place.
Wow. Wait, so hold on. We're already down the rabbit hole. So talk to me about that. How did your parents end up in Australia?
I'll give you the short. There's a very long version of that story. I'll give you the short version of that story.
Fair enough.
So my father is an engineer, and he did his training here in the United States. He got his PhD from the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. He came back to Egypt. I'm giving the short version. So he came back to Egypt, but he wanted to get back to the United States. It was difficult at the time to do that, so he actually had to do it through a couple of steps. There was some, government political things there. So he initially moved to Iraq, was there for a couple of years. Then he got a job at the University of New South Wales in Australia, and then from there he was finally able to get back to the United States. And his initial position there was at George Washington University. I was born in that second to last stop there.
Oh. So do you? So I apologize. I'm not. What's the native language in Egypt?
Arabic.
Arabic. Do you speak Arabic?
I do.
You do? Okay. Wow.
Yeah. But anyway, so then I actually grew up mostly in the Hampton, Newport News area of Virginia, so the Tidewater area of Virginia. So I lived there, basically from the time I was under a year old, and then essentially through college, because I actually went to college at the College of William and Mary, which is just right near there in Williamsburg, Virginia.
Huh. So was it just you? Do you have brothers, sisters?
Oh, just me. Me and my parents. Yeah.
So let me ask you that. So given the time frame and the geography of where you were, was there any issues with you being, your family being, Middle Eastern and then settling here in the States?
That's a great question. I didn't notice it so much as a kid. I mean, especially say pre-1980s. I mean, yeah, it was different just because they didn't know many kids who were Muslim or things like that. So it was a little bit different, but I didn't feel any prejudices against me or anything like that. There was a little bit, not much, a little bit in the 1980s, because you may remember this is when the hijackings were happening from the Libyans and stuff like that.
Right.
But it was very much it was the Libyans. It wasn't generalized.
Right.
But overall, it was, the community that I was in was pretty welcoming. So I didn't notice too much. Now, it's possible I was being naive, but I at least didn't pick up on any sort of act of discrimination. Certainly nothing like, what happened, say, post 9/11. That a whole different world after that.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get to that. Yeah. So what was it like for you? What were you into as a kid? What kept you busy?
I did like science, go figure.
It never crossed my mind.
Never would have guessed. I used to like going outside and catching bugs and things like that. And see, I remember I would catch these big June bugs, or these giant bugs you get, and you could put them over ice and they'd start slow down and stop moving, and then I'd bring them in, and then let them warm back up, and then they get active and fly off. And
Oh yeah, no, I did that. Had fireflies in the jar.
definitely had fly fries and jar. Try to see like if you kill it at just the right second, do they stay lit?
That's right. That's right.
Things like that.
Yeah.
All sorts of fun science experiments. But also, I was really into sci-fi again. Big shock. Given that.
So, so did you read it? Did you watch it? Was it both?
Mostly watching. I did read a little bit, like I read a little bit of, say, like Ray Bradbury kinds of things, as a kid, but I was never a big reader. So I more like to watch it on TV.
So what was your jam? What did you like the most?
It very much depends on age. I mean, certainly, I went and saw Star Wars when it was in the theater, the original Star Wars, the 1977 one. I was probably like 6 at the time when I saw it. And I remember thinking it was great. Yeah, I remember seeing both Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Yeah. And for a 6-year-old kid, let me tell you, there's a big difference between those two movies.
Oh my God. Holy cow. Yeah.
Right? One's like midlife crisis, man. And then very, very end, get a little bit of aliens. And the other one was much more action, battle scenes, blah, blah. So yeah, of course I like Star Wars.
I've talked about it before in the show, but I remember seeing Star Wars in the theater. I was 6 years old. And this is back when, the screens were huge. The big ones.
Especially relative to our size.
That's right. And when you're a little dude and then you see Darth Vader, who's like 60 feet tall and scared. Holy cow, he scared the crap out of me.
Right?
Yeah. Whoa, dude. Scary mofo, but still.
Oh yeah, totally.
Awesome. I did watch, honestly, even though Close Encounters is a very different kind of science fiction experience, it's one of those, I probably watched it, not nearly as much as Star Wars, but there was some sort of like, there was still something that kind of like, I don't know if kids today, honestly, I don't know if they would have the patience for it.
It's different, yeah.
It's slower pace, it's a slower burn, it's a character study much more. And I wonder how my kids, I haven't even tried to introduce it to my kids. I'm not even sure if they'd be into it or not.
I don't think mine would. I think mine would be like, this is really boring.
Right, that's right. And I haven't seen it in, God, I don't know, 30 years or so. I don't even know if it holds up. I'm sure it does. I'm guessing it does, but I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. So you saw Star Wars. Right?
Thinking of things that don't hold up. This is obviously like fast forwarding a lot. I remember my wife and I watched 2000. Or sorry, not 2001. It is 2001: A Space Odyssey. We saw that movie right shortly after we got together. So this was mid 90s. Yeah. We both fell asleep. It was so slow. It was such a slow burn. But again, like you're saying, the movies from that era just didn't move at the same pace.
It's a different kind of movie. It's a very kind of stylized movie, and it's probably one, at least for me, I've seen 2001 maybe 2 or 3 times. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll see it once more in my lifetime because it's just not that kind of like.
Yeah,
it's 2.5 hours, and it can feel much longer than that.
Exactly.
And what's interesting though, did you ever read the book?
Oh yeah.
Right.
The book was great.
It's such a it's so optimistic. Like you walk away at the end of the book and you're like, wow, like, okay, this is cool. Yeah. You watch the movie and you're like, oh God.
What is this? Yeah, the movie has tried to rely on special effects, which were great, the year it released and whenever the 60s is before I was born. But, and if you go generations later, it's like, okay.
Well, even it's interesting though, if you notice with Kubrick, so like he did in 2001 with the movie, which is much more, let's say, harrowing and haunting than the book. In the movie Clockwork Orange, in the original version, there's one more chapter at the end of the book.
Oh, I never read the book Clockwork Orange. I saw the movie, but I never read the book.
Right. So the book is more or less the movie. So at the very end of the movie, Alex, he's tormented and they're reprogramming him, right, to become like a good person, but ultimately, he is who he is, and we know he's like the devil. The devil's still there.
Yeah.
There's one more chapter after that in the book, and in that book, he's like 21 years old, and he grew out of it.
Really?
He's just wearing a suit and tie, and he's going to work. He lives with his girlfriend.
That's a very different ending.
He's just living his life, and he sees one of his droogs on the streets, and he's like, "Come on, you want to come and like do something nasty?" And he's kind of like, "Nah, I'm over it." Right. So like
amazing. I watched Clockwork Orange with a friend of mine in college. Her name was Jen. And she was literally teasing me. This was a show. I saw this in college, probably like 1992 or something like that. She was literally teasing me 2 weeks ago about my making her watch that movie.
I mean, that's another like very disturbing movie. But if you ever get so motivated, you don't even have to read the whole book. Read the last chapter and you'll see that the original concept was he just grew out of it.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So it's a totally different experience. But anyway, all right.
We went way off on a tangent there.
Sure, we did. That's okay. That's the best part of the show. All right, so you were into,
Yeah. So I mentioned sci-fi. I mean, you asked about other sci-fi. I guess as a kid, the show I loved a lot, just the TV show I'd watch often was Star Blazers, which you remember is
Blazers,
the anime Battleship Yamato, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Oh
Yeah, I love that show. I thought it was great.
Yes, yes. It's funny. I've been meaning to. It keeps popping up on my periphery every now and again, and I keep saying, you know what, I got to go back and watch that, and then I forget. I got to look that up.
Parts of it hold up, parts of it don't.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true of a lot of things. So were you a Star Trek kid?
Not until probably age 8 or so. And,
I mean, that's still pretty young.
No, it's still pretty young. And I remember when I was first introduced to it, I remember being really captivated. What is this? This is fascinating. I remember the first episode I ever saw was For the World is Hollow and I've Touched the Sky. And it was really interesting, seeing these people who live on this asteroid or something like that, and they didn't even know what they were on. They didn't understand what they were on. Everybody else was trying to figure this out. Right. And it was just very, it was a lot of true sci-fi there. It's just, this progress towards understanding. So after I saw that the first time, I was like, I want to find this on TV. And from there, I watched all this. I mean, I saw Wrath of Khan in the theaters and all the movies and all the TV shows from there on.
Fantastic. Yes, actually, I had Nick Meyer on the show last year. We got to talk about that. It was quite good.
Standing.
Yes. So let me ask you. So
sure.
So you see Star Trek as a kid. Obviously, we're both about the same age. So we saw it in syndication.
Yep.
Goes off the air.
Mm-hmm.
The movies come. Wrath of Khan, brilliant. It's still, honestly, it's my top 5 favorite movies of all time to this day. A bunch of the movies.
Fair.
You could argue, how much you like some of the other ones. I mean, overall, very good experience. But then they bring the Next Gen comes on, and I remember I could not wait. And they're going to put in, at the time, this was 1987. It was something like, my math might be wrong. It was like $5 million an episode, which was unheard of back then.
Yeah,
that's
totally.
That's like 10 or 15 million an episode today.
Yeah.
At the time. And I was so excited. And I watched it. And I'm like, this is the most boring thing I've ever seen in my life. What the hell am I watching? And it killed it for me. And the pilot, I'm like, what is this? Of course, it's also different characters, and it just I let it go. Years later, the whole show had gone, all 7 seasons. I didn't watch a single episode. I was in Europe. I did an exchange program abroad. And I was in England, and a buddy in Manchester, and a buddy of mine was watching Next Gen. That was his thing. I was like, what are you watching? He's like, I'm watching Next Gen. And I'm like, oh, what are you watching this for? It's so stupid. And it's not the original. I was being kind of a douche about it. It was his thing. And then the next day, it's the same time, 4:00 every day. So then I'd pop in. I'm like, what are you, again? And I'd watch. I'm like, oh, this is so dumb the way they do it. And then another day, I'm like, yeah, all right, this is all right. 2 weeks later, I'm like, dude, shut up. Next Gen's on. Be quiet. I'm watching. Leave me alone.
You got sucked in.
Sucked me right in, and diehard fan ever since. Okay, so Star Wars, Star Trek, sci-fi, and you were into biology. What about your friends? Were they sci-fi, nerds?
Oh yeah.
Too? Yeah.
Oh yeah. We watched the original Battlestar Galactica together too. And I mean, all my high school friends were really into that. All of them were really into the space battleship Yamato. They were into very much the same things I was into. It wasn't in any way unusual, at least among the people I hung out with. Right. Obviously, there would be people outside that group who.
Now, what about the science aspect? Did you have other, did you have science-y friends, or was that kind of like your thing?
Yeah. Well, I'd say most of the friends I hung out with, say in high school, were at least STEM adjacent, maybe not science specific, but they might be a little bit more on the engineering side, a little bit more computer science, things like that. So there's STEM more generally. Yeah.
Right. All right. So I want to ask you about this because it's really impactful in the way we live today. Yeah. So to achieve the status that you have, and you're a professor at Duke University, correct? Professor of biology, right? I mean, you don't just sort of answer an online ad and say, hey, I'd like to apply. I mean, you have to theoretically know a few things, right? So to achieve the status that you have in the field of science, you certainly have to have the aptitude for it and the drive to pursue it. And we live in some very serious times. Not that other times were not serious, but unique, I think, to almost anyone in our lifetimes, with a real challenge about what are facts and what aren't, and how and where science is to be trusted. So from someone who's on the inside, this is what you do all day, every day, and you talk to people and you're dedicated to it. What's your take on the current state of the scientific community?
Of the scientific community, or the reaction of the public to the scientific community?
Both.
Okay, so the scientific community, I mean, it's fine in that sense that, you know, they're it's not that the scientists themselves are rattled by this sort of thing. I mean, they're doing their jobs. They're trying to discover new life and new civilizations or whatever they're trying to do. That part is fine. I mean, there's issues I have obviously with the community where, you know, that you know, it certainly could be more inclusive. It certainly could do, you know, better in a bunch of different areas. But that's not what you're talking about here. That's a different area.
Right.
The public acceptance of science, that's a funny one, right? And it's weird because, I mean, there was always like a little tiny hint of that, but it seems like it got magnified a lot just, you know, within the past decade in a big way, where people are like, oh, well, science is political too, and things like that. And it's like, you know, it's not completely true, but I think it's it's not completely false, but it's way overstated. It's way overstated.
So
I mean,
go
ahead.
No, so how do we, or can we, convince those who have become, or either always were or have become anti-science, to realize that science impacts them every single day in a multitude of ways, and that without it, we would literally crumble as a society?
Yeah, I actually think even the anti-science people know that. I think they believe that. I think they just disagree with specific pieces. Like, for example, like, you know, nobody's going to say, well, I shouldn't say nobody. Few people would say, I'm not going to take any drugs anymore because they were developed by science and I don't trust science. You know, no, people are still going to take their ibuprofen. They're still going to take their, I mean, and they know this came from science. So I feel like a lot of it is pretty safe. It's more just this thing goes against one of my core fundamental beliefs and I don't like it, and therefore I doubt it. And I found a YouTube video online which goes along with which supports my reasoning for wanting to accept it and gives it another rationale beyond just I don't like it.
So I'm glad that you meant, I mean, I'm not glad that it's there, but that you brought it up. So with medical doctors who have been driven bananas. Well, I saw on the internet that if you sneeze 7 times on a Tuesday and stand on 1 foot, it means that I have cancer in my left earlobe.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, that's not how it works.
No, that's right.
So how is that so in your field and then with your colleagues, how is it where someone says, well, I read something on the internet that says that if you use nanobots sideways, I can reprogram human life as we know it, or
so it's tricky because what scientists have to do is we have to strike a balance, because what we can't do is we're not going to be successful just being condescending jerks, which I have to say some people do that. Some people take that approach, like, look, I know science, you don't get it, I had more schooling than you. Like, nobody's gonna that's not gonna win anybody over. So what I've tried to do, so I have a friend right now, one of my high school friends, he's been, for example, opposed to the COVID vaccination and a whole bunch of stuff like that. What I've tried to do is I've tried to use arguments that I think he would get, because, you know, he was saying something about like, oh my gosh, you know, I read online that all these pilots who took it and they all died and things like that. I was like, okay, let's think about this for a minute. You know, probably 100 people who've had this vaccine. Have any of them died? Any at all? Have any of them had a side effect that lasted more than a week? Have any of and I try to just use like arguments where where like he can use his personal experience and relate to these things.
Right. That's true. That's a good point. Right.
And it's like you've known people who've had COVID. Were they all, like, you know, you're saying it's just the flu, but like, were they back at work 4 days later? What fraction of them were? And you're like, yeah, maybe a few were. Okay, but think about all of them now. You know, and just the more you can use people's like lived experience, I feel like that's better at getting.
You know, that's a good point, and you're right. I think it's something that we don't do enough of, because the emotions are just so high that we go from 0 to 100 without realizing that, you know, there's a 2 in there, and there's a 5, and there's an 8, and there's an 11. Like, we can slowly get there if we need to, but we probably don't have to. So all right, so I have a multi-part question, so stick with me on this one.
Sure,
all right?
Please.
All right, great. All right, so your specialties, if I understand correctly, are in evolution, genetics, and genomics.
Yep.
It's just a quick aside. When my former life, I work in the real estate business now, but I was actually a healthcare journalist for a long time, and I actually wrote a column about genetics and how close we were to we're like 97% the same as like a fruit fly, right? So anyway.
I don't know about that fraction, but yeah, in general,
right.
We're very similar, yeah.
Right. I mean, thankfully, we're not the Brundle fly, but
Yeah.
good enough, right. So as you understand these nuanced fields of study today, question one, what most fascinates you about human evolution? And for the record, on this show, we are going with that. Yes, we actually evolved over billions of years.
Yeah. Honestly, I think so. I would take that right there. What I think is one of the most sort of like brain exploding things is we are fundamentally related to everything that's alive. When I say related to, I don't just mean similar to. I mean like actually share common ancestors with. And it's not just all people, which that I feel is like uncontroversial with everybody, but everything, like everything that's alive out there, like we share a common ancestor. Like I actually have an ancestor that's descendant was grass. I share an ancestor that's descendant was a mushroom. I share ancestors that's descendant was like one of my gut bacteria. That is definitely a mind-blowing sort of thing, right?
I mean, it seems, you probably know this more than I, and I can't say that I've studied in depth, but you see, for example, like certain shapes and patterns that occur in nature, whether it's a water droplet or a snowflake or something. And they say, look, you see that shape of that snowflake? That's what your cell looks like. Yeah. And it's not like it's similar. It's like you could overlay it and it's identical. And there's no way that could be it couldn't be random.
Yeah. Well, the DNA code is one of the best things about this. So if you think about like we have this triplet code, these 3-letter codes that are associated with the amino acids that are in our proteins, right? There's no particular magic about like the three. We say letters, but they're like basically 3 chemicals. We're just labeling it with letters. But like A or was it TAG, right? That 3-letter thing that encodes for the amino acid methionine. That does it in us. That does it in like dogs. That does it in trees. That does it in bacteria. There's nothing magic about these 3 chemicals. Why they should be associated with this amino acid? Like it could have just been anything, right? Right. The fact it's the same in everything is it's incomprehensible that it would be explained by anything besides that we're actually related. And it's not just that one. There's a whole bunch of them that are like that. There's very, 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 very few changes in the history of life in that code.
So actually I lied. This is a 1A question.
Sure, please.
So I'm fascinated by genomics, and I remember because professionally I was studying.
Actually, I gave the wrong code. I know. So I said TAG. It's ATG.
ATG, yeah. I was studying because I was a healthcare journalist. And there was a time when the idea of cracking the human genome was just starting. This was in a more serious way. It was really like kind of like in the 90s, I guess, in the early 2000s. And I did some research and I'd done some writing on it. So talk to me about genomics, really cracking that code, what that means, what it took to get there, and what might it mean for us. So it's one thing you could say, well, it's an intellectual exercise. Oh, it's fascinating. Yeah. Okay. But what do we do with that? And now that we have this information and we know whatever we know today, which is probably a fraction of what we will know as time goes on, what do you think that it potentially could mean for us as a species?
So when you say cracking that code, there's some aspects which we've absolutely cracked, which is, for example, like the 3-letter codes. That we know very well. Yes. But like say when I think when most people talk about genomics and the functions, I think people are talking about like what is the function of every individual gene in our genome, and we have I don't remember the exact number, something like 30,000 genes or whatever. Right. The vast majority, we have no idea what they do. Like we can put them into some group and say like this seems to be associated with binding to blah, but that's so generic. It's so unspecific that by and large, what happens if you break it? What is it actually binding? So we're really, we're nowhere close. The example I like to use is people say like, well, can we genetically engineer somebody to have super strength? And like, in principle, that might be possible, but we don't have nearly the knowledge to do it. Like, not even close. Like we're very, very far from being able to do that.
Right. Well, that's a funny thing, though. And look, and this is maybe I'm pulling on my sci-fi too much, but we're really far away until we're not.
Yeah, that's true. At some point, I believe like that could be found.
Somebody somewhere is gonna have that aha moment.
Yeah.
And we never know when that moment's coming.
Yeah, and there'll be massive. To be clear, there'll be massive ethical issues with that.
Well, that's a whole separate thing. But
I just want to make sure we say that explicitly.
Oh God, yes. I mean, whether
I want to make it sound like this is a goal.
Right, there's the can we or should we?
Yeah.
Right. So, all right. So let me.
I mean, there's a few diseases, for example, that people know that when you disrupt, say the BRCA2 gene, that's associated with much higher risk of breast cancer. I mean, there's a few things like that, and we know what the mutations are that are disrupting it. So there's a few things like that, and in theory, those could be genetically engineered to be fixed. But the number of things like that is very small, especially the number of things like that which have a big effect, as opposed to this seems to have a 1% effect on okay.
Right. Okay. All right, fair enough. All right. So let me ask you this. Again, this is, I guess it's a merging of just who you are and or life studying science, genomics, biology. What gives you, since we're talking about evolution, what gives you the most hope about human evolution?
About human evolution?
Yes.
See, I thought you were going to say genetics. I thought you were
okay, or genetics.
Well, honestly, for genetics, I am still floored at how quickly our community, when I say our community, I mean the medical community, not my community, our community came up with these RNA-based vaccines for COVID.
Amazing.
That was crazy fast. That was absolutely crazy fast. That it went from
the technology, though, it already existed.
The technology existed to a degree, but the fact that in less than a year, we went from hey, there's this really bad virus to here we have an approved vaccine that's already been clinically tested and everything
unheard of.
Right, exactly. And even the technology, I mean, it was known, but it had not certainly been in high use or anything like that.
Right.
That is phenomenal, and that gives me a lot of hope that wow, we can solve really big, again, we, not me, but we humanity can solve really big problems really fast if we put our minds to it and a lot of money behind it.
Right. I mean, what's that old saying? Necessity is the mother of all invention, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, all right,
that was amazing.
Oh, and really, really incredible stuff. And what I still find amazing is the anti-vaxxers is one thing, but even the people who are well, I got the vaccine and I still got sick. I'm yeah, but guess what? You didn't die.
Yeah.
You didn't go to the hospital.
And it's funny people say that, the flu vaccine has had an effectiveness of 30% or whatever for how many decades, and nobody's complained about that.
We could go down that rabbit hole forever. So yeah. I'll pull us out of it. Okay. So part 3 of the 3-part question.
Sure.
So if you recall, in Terminator 2, there's a scene when teenage John Connor and the good Arnie Terminator, they're watching a bunch of kids kind of play shoot 'em up.
I haven't seen this for 20 years, but go ahead.
but they're watching these kids kind of going, they're playing, pew pew pew, right? And Arnie and the Terminator ends up saying, the kid says, he goes, we're not going to make it, are we? I mean, as people. And Arnie says, the Terminator says, it's in your nature to destroy yourselves. Do you agree? Do you agree or disagree with that sentiment?
No, I think it's overstated. I mean, yeah, we're selfish. We're but again, when push comes to shove, as you said, necessity is the mother of invention. If it looks like global climate change being a striking counterexample to this. Right. If an individual benefit is very obvious and we can put investment for it, we will solve those problems. The problem that we have, of course, with things like global climate change is the individual benefit is less obvious. It's more the community benefit where individuals have to sacrifice for the greater good. And that's where
that's a shame. We don't talk about it as a culture, back like JFK would say, don't ask what, your country could do for you, but what you could do for your country. We don't talk that way, right?
No,
because we don't talk that way.
That's not part of the American dream ananymore, as we call it, right? The American dream is I succeed.
Yeah, that rugged individualism, which is mostly nonsense anyway, because pretty much everyone gets help somewhere along the way. All right, so let's shift now to your merging of science and Star Trek.
Yes.
Okay, so my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you were on a cruise that kind of really got you into the blending of these two worlds. Can you confirm and or elaborate?
Well, I was already doing some of this before that. So, I mean, the cruise certainly solidified it. So let me take a step back a little bit earlier. I went to my first convention in 2014. You
mean Star Trek convention?
No, this was a general convention. This is Dragon Con in Atlanta.
Oh, Dragon Con. Okay.
Yeah. So it's broad. It has, there's a Trek track, but there's also a Star Wars track. And you can see, all the CW shows, people from The Flash and Green Arrow and things like that. So it was very broad. I was surprised when I got there. Well, I mean, I knew a little bit ahead of time because one of my colleagues here at Duke University, Professor Eric Spana, he was presenting there at Dragon Con on basically science topics, but using Harry Potter and using the video game Mass Effect and things like that at the convention. I was like, wow, this is a great idea. I love this. So I reached out to Garrett Wang, who plays Harry Kim in Star Trek Voyager. And he also runs the Trek track at Dragon Con. I said, hey, could I do one of these talks on, say, evolution or something like that, using Star Trek examples? And he was very gracious. He said, sure, we'd love that. We like having more, science content, and I think it would go over well. So he was very positive. So I did that for the first time in 2016. I just gave a talk there. I was super nervous, and it was amazed like how many people showed up. It was like 200 people in the room to hear this evidence for evolution talk. Just happened to be using Star Trek.
All right, cool. All right, so you've been utilizing Star Trek as part of how you teach science.
Yeah.
So my question is this: how difficult or not was it to get some people to kind of get them over the fact that, all right, Star Trek is just this silly sci-fi show and it doesn't really have a place in your professional setting?
So you're asking, like, how did I get people here at Duke over that, or how people in the audience over that?
Well, the audience, I think
they were already bought in. Yeah, they were fine.
I'm talking about more, let's say at Duke, for example.
Yeah, I mean, some of them aren't.
Right. Still now. So you've been doing this now for what, 10 years, and they're still
not quite that long, but like 6 years or so. Yeah,
and they're still.
Really? There's a range. There's a range. So like I mentioned, I had a colleague who was already doing it longer than I was doing it. So I mean, he obviously was very bought in. Some people immediately embraced it. And they said, "Wow, that's fantastic! What a brilliant idea! What a great way to connect with people." So probably that was the majority. Actually, was more in that camp.
Okay.
I mean, there are a subset who are like, "What a waste of time."
Now, so let me ask you that. So for those who are like that, and look, no matter what you do, you're never going to get them all.
No, exactly, and I don't need to.
No, that's right. There's an old sales adage. It says, "I don't need to get them all. I just need to get enough."
Exactly.
Right. But let me ask you this though: for those who are still like, don't give me this Star Warsy, Trekky, whatever. I don't know. I don't want to hear about this. Have they actually taken the time to sit and listen to your explanations and then said, nah, or had they just said, you know what, I just dismiss it out of hand, and because I dismiss it, I won't even consider it?
Number two. It was definitely number two.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. There might be a handful of number one, but I haven't heard about them. They certainly have not been as explicit. It was mostly number two. It was mostly people who just are from a different generation, and and academics can sometimes be a little snobby, as I'm sure many people know.
You jest. You jest.
There's a subset of people who are like, I can't believe you're watching something besides PBS and TV shows dubbed from Lithuanian or whatever. So
yeah,
which is fair enough.
Well, it's just a side note. I mean, I've spent plenty of time in academia.
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's like, do you realize like where your salary comes from?
Yeah, right. Exactly. And that's one of the comments.
It comes from dreamers who want to expand the minds of others.
Exactly.
That's how you get paid.
So, I mean, the thing is, and I say this actually in the forward of my book too, I mean, there are some people who will always just embrace science right off the bat. And they're going to go out, they're going to find the PBS documentaries. That's great. They'll buy a book that's by a scientist about science, and it has no science fiction. Great. More power to that subset of people. There is another large subset of people who won't do that. They're not going to go out and get that book. They're not going to watch a PBS special, but they're very happy watching Marvel movies. They're very happy watching Star Wars. They're very happy watching Star Trek. And if you happen to have something that leverages that just a little bit, they're much more likely to watch that than not. In fact, we actually just finished, I'm finishing up a study right now. We're actually in the process of writing it up, where I made this educational video online that was using Star Trek to teach a concept. And I had a bunch of people watch it and then rate, like, what was the probability you were going to watch this video, for example, if it didn't have any Star Trek connection to it at all?
Right.
And a ton of them said, like, there's no way. Like, I wouldn't have watched it. There's no way. I would have had no interest. There's a reason they call it pop culture. It's popular.
All right. So
why not leverage that?
We got a lot more to get to. So I'm going to dive in. All right. So look, we're going to get to the meat of it now. Okay. So look, let's hear it. So first off, which Star Trek shows have you consulted for, and are you still doing it?
Sure. Right this minute, I'm not consulting for any. I did consult for Star Trek Discovery seasons 3 and 4, not 1 and 2. I've done a little bit for Star Trek Prodigy, but things that haven't come out yet. So I'm waiting to see when those show up. And then beyond that, like, the occasional like one sentence thing, but that's kind of it.
All right. So can you share any specifics of how your notes or suggestions made it on screen?
Sure. So in Star Trek, I apologize, this is a spoiler for Star Trek Discovery season 4.
Right.
At the very end of the season, the Discovery came across these aliens that they'd never encountered before, and these aliens were essentially like communicating in some way, but it took them a long time to figure out what was actually happening there. So what happened, rewinding back 2 years before this episode, the first episode Along These Lines aired, we had a discussion, so it was me and the showrunner and a couple other people on a call, and they said, we want to make some aliens that are truly alien, where we can't use the universal translator, they can't just talk, it's not going to be a human with a prosthetic. We want it to be a truly alien.
Oh, that's right. Well, they wound up cracking the code for the language.
Exactly. So what I suggested to him is, why not use chemical communication rather than verbal communication? This is something like completely different. It's actually quite common on Earth, but it's not something that's depicted very often in science fiction.
Right. Okay.
And they said, that sounds good. They said, sketch this out. Like, what would the basis for it be? I said, well, how about hydrocarbons? Again, this is something that's used quite frequently as pheromones or some sort of chemical communication on Earth. So then worked with them in terms of how this would work in terms of what things would be said. Worked with the VFX people in terms of like, what does a hydrocarbon look like? And for example, I remember they made this very simple one initially with like 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens. Like, that is a hydrocarbon, but that's also just methane. This is something they're going to encounter all the time. It has to be something that's complex and unusual, as opposed to just something they're just going to encounter all the time.
If I'm recalling that episode correctly, and we were just talking about Close Encounters, it was almost like an almost exact replica, right? They were sort of like pulling up the sound, like the sounds and the lights were lighting up, and they were repeating it. I mean, that was like
similar themes, and that was part of it too, because the hydrocarbon it was packaged in the supramolecule, and then there was a bunch of them in there, and then essentially what had to happen is they had to read it in a specific order, and that's where the lights piece came in. Yeah.
All right. So, have there been any moments when you're consulting with Star Trek and they're doing, and where you have said to them, guys, listen, I know that you want this to happen, but scientifically, even in our little goofy made up world, you've kind of gone off the deep end. It kind of makes no sense here. Yeah. Have you had any of those kind of moments?
No, I mean, I would never take that stance, because the whole point is, I mean, this is fiction, right? I wouldn't if I took that stance, they'd be like, well, we'll just then back. The example I like to use is, let's say, for example, they need something to turn invisible. If I just say you can't do it, they're gonna be like, fine, we're gonna do an invisibility gun, which is like it's a ridiculous concept, right? But I mean, story will always trump science. So,
sure, of course, as it should. I guess exactly. My point is that but within whatever world that you create, there are rules within that world, and if you go too far afield, it just kind of like doesn't fit. Were there any of those moments where, look, I know this is all made up and it's all good, but you're really kind of like way off the grid here? Or it was all
again, I would never take that, even if like deep down inside I might think that briefly, I would never take that stance, because I mean, to some extent, like, this is what's going to happen. So
just curious.
My job is to take it. So, and this is actually even more true for Dr. Erin McDonald. She's like the main science advisor for the whole franchise. The job is essentially to make it work, or at least make it as close to as possible working. What you can do, and this would be fair, is like, you can suggest little tweaks. Like, I tell you what, rather than this, can we just do this? And they're very amenable to that. As long as it doesn't change something fundamental about the story, they're amenable to like a little tweak.
All right, cool enough. All right, so quick interlude for the folks who came in a little late. If you have any comments or questions for Mohammed, put them in the chat box and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so are there elements of your field of study that you're hoping will get addressed in some form of Star Trek that hasn't happened already?
That's a good question. I mean, to some extent, like the fundamental thing I raised earlier about like all life being related, that already has come up in Star Trek, a couple of times. So that's already there. I can't think of anything that jumps out at me where, I mean, I can think of some just like cool little things, but nothing specific like from like associated with my research or anything like that.
Okay, so let's say, for argument's sake, that we as a species manage to get our acts together to the point where interstellar travel actually becomes possible. How long from today do you think that would actually take?
To get to interstellar travel?
Yes.
I mean, we haven't done interplanetary yet.
Okay. Well, even interplanetary, right? Let's say
interplanetary. I could see it happening within my lifetime. I could see, like, will a human stand on Mars in my lifetime? Yeah, I think that's, I don't know if I go so far as to say it's likely, but it's certainly possible. I mean, we have the technology to do it now. It would just be, it'll be challenging. And I mean, there are challenges associated with getting people there. It's not so much like we just need a good rocket kind of thing, but a lot of it is just this, like, how are we going to have somebody who's exposed to cosmic rays for, say, like the 6 months or whatever? I don't know exactly how long it takes to travel to Mars. That's a lot of radiation exposure.
Right.
And it's possible to put some sort of something that would shield for that, but I mean, a lot of that ionizing radiation is pretty powerful there. So
and I guess you can't even really know what the effects are going to be unless you go out and do it.
Well, I mean, we know what cosmic rays would do, and we don't want to.
No, I know. I guess like if let's say we said, hey, we've come up with the ray shielding or whatever. Yeah. You have to test it. The only way to test it is to send it out there and see what happens.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. So some sort of probe let's just assess
something, and then maybe you have to put rabbits in there or something. Like you have to see, like, what will this do to a living being?
That's true. That's true.
Right. So, and I mean, I don't want to be that test subject.
No. Maybe a one-way, sadly, maybe a one-way trip for whatever does it.
That's for sure. Okay. All right. So let's say we solve the fuel. Let's say we solve the fuel problem.
Yeah, the fuel problems. I feel like that's not necessarily the worst problem. I mean, I feel like the worst problem is going to be the radiation one. I feel like, but I'm not an astrophysicist by any means.
Let's say we can solve the fuel problem, the radiation problem, and we can even like figure out a way where we can put ourselves into some sort of stasis.
Oh, wow. Okay. Right. So then you fix the time problem.
Right. So now it's like, hey, if it takes 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I'll just wake up and it'll be good. So that we can travel these incredible distances. Do you think we'll also be able to create computers and other tech that can handle the unknown elements of space that we simply haven't had contact? We don't even know, those sort of known unknowns.
Yeah. I mean, the good thing about space is, as implied in the name, it's mostly pretty empty.
That's right.
I mean, it's. I guess there's so much without knowing what the unknowns are. It's hard to answer that question. That doesn't feel unsolvable to me. Like if you fixed all the things you were just saying there, that doesn't feel unsolvable to me.
Okay.
I just worry it'll feel like a waste at the end because it's gonna take them a really long time to get someplace, and they may get there and it's like it's actually not that interesting here.
Right. Like, oh wow.
Now it's like now we go back.
Right. Wow, there's a lot of dust out here.
Yeah.
Yay. Okay. All right. So real quick. So you teach science at the college level using Star Trek to sort of help people sort of like make sense of it, accept it. Give me one example of something that you would teach in your class.
Sure. So I assume you're referring to my genetics evolution Star Trek class specifically.
Go for it.
I think a good example for that. I mean, I wish I had the syllabus in front of me. I could pull up a really good one. I remember like the syllabus basically follows the same class as the majors course, which is just called Introduction to Genetics and Evolution, with the exception that it has a little bit of astrobiology in the very front end, which that obviously that's not in the class. But generally speaking, like the regular class starts with evidence for evolution, and then goes into like basics of inheritance. It goes into more advanced sorts of genetic mapping kinds of things. All these things come up a lot in Star Trek. So in terms of like all life being related, there's the episode from The Next Generation, The Chase. So we'd watch. So what I would usually do in terms of how this would progress in the class is I would present just a little bit of a lecture on the scientific concept, and then we watch either a whole or part of an episode related to that, and then we talk about it afterwards in terms of like, okay, what about this depiction was good? What about this depiction was not so good?
Which episode of which one's The Chase? I don't by title.
That's the sorry about that. The Chase is the one where they find that all these alien species are actually related 4 billion years ago, and then there was like essentially this panspermia thing where all these plants were seeded.
Right. Yes.
You remember the episode?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a good example in the sense of like, okay, what are the assumptions for this? So I mean, in the good sense, it says that everything is related. Okay, that's fair, and it's extending it not just among, say, like life on Earth, but it's actually extending it to life outside Earth. That's possible. So that part's a good thing. And what I like about this is essentially, and this is true for all science fiction in general, you can treat it like a set of hypotheses and say, okay, what's the evidence for this, and what's the evidence against this? And for that first part, that's fine. The tough part for that one, and this is something I use in my convention talks a lot as well too. The tough part from that is you get basically the same result on every planet 4 billion years later. So what is that? That basically means that there's almost like a determinism there. That like we know 4 billion years later, you can run the same experiment over and over again. Like in one case you get a Cardassian, one case you get a Romulan, one case you get a human. It's like they all kind of look the same.
That's right. That's right.
That determinism is problematic. And we know that's problematic because we know there's a lot of random chance events that had a big role in making us what we are today. So the easy example, 65 million years ago, big asteroid hit Earth, knocked back the dinosaurs, and that's what allowed mammals to diversify into a whole bunch of new forms and things like that. Did that happen on all these other planets? Exactly 65 million years ago.
Right. So if we go back to the idea that, at least here on Earth, genetically, every life form is within a few percentage points identical.
Yeah.
So if we are, let's say, the children of cosmic dust, right, that dispersed into the universe, is it logical, reasonable to assume that no matter how far we go, because we came theoretically, if we come from that big bang, that same source, that no matter how different you may look from us, that we share those same inherent embers of creation within, no matter where you went?
Yeah, it seems very unlikely, right?
Right.
Plus, genetically, you're more closely related to grass than you are to a Vulcan. Right? I mean,
that's an odd one. Okay. All right. Well, all right. That was great. But now it's time where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, which I created specifically for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are Future Kirk, Reporting for Duty, Pikes Peak, Crew Stew, Techie Retcon, Transporter Deluxe, and AI into House. All right. So you ready?
Yep.
All right. All right. Round and round. Wherever she lands is what you get. No whammies. Let's go. What do we got? All right. Come on. And for you, reporting for duty. Okay. So what do we got? Reporting for duty is, okay, you can serve on the crew of any Star Trek starship from any period of any series. Which would you choose and why?
For any, I'm going to pick the Cerritos from Star Trek Lower Decks.
You gotta love Boimler, man.
Yeah, right.
And I don't. Are you watching The Boys by any chance?
I am watching The Boys.
So he's talking, and I'm like, I keep calling him Boimler.
Yeah, totally. Well, at the Star Trek Mission Chicago, that actor was there and playing Boimler. So I was like, oh my gosh, you're even more tying these two things together.
It's funny. That's one of all the new tracks. I find that's one that people are like, either you really like it or it just doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
Because it's really like the Rick and Morty of Star Trek.
Yeah. It is exactly that. It's exactly what it is.
You either have to embrace that lunacy or you kind of don't. And if you don't, then it's like, well, this is not Star Trek. This is not what I'm like, oh, well, then this isn't for you. I mean, I think as it went along, it just kind of as they got more outlandish. I mean, some of it is like, they got really crazy and pretty raunchy in some places.
They did a little bit. It was a little crazy.
I was shocked. Wow.
Yeah.
I think it's cool.
But that what was it? The second to last episode, I think it was called Wedge Dudge or something like that, where it had the 3 ships. That was fantastic storytelling.
Yeah.
Fantastic storytelling.
Yeah, so good. So good. Okay. So now we've got our next section where you're going to pick your poison. I got 3 options.
Okay.
And the choices are, and they're going to come up randomly. It's either Trek Me Now, Magic Mushrooms, or First Contact. Now you got to pick A, B, or C, and I'm not going to tell you which is which. Which one? A. And A is Trek Me Now. Okay, so this is right up your alley. So Star Trek style tech, such as cell phones, are in operation today. If you could choose any single element of any Star Trek series, this is scientifically, to be applied in our life as it is today, what would it be?
Replicator, because you can make everything else.
Right. Replicators. Good for you. Okay.
So you make the big replicator, then it's like, now I want a transporter. Now I want a phaser. Now I want.
Yes. Okay.
That was a total cheat answer. It's like wishing for more wishes.
No, but it's funny. I was thinking about this and I said, well, what do I think is what's the most likely one to come up? And I figured it would be the replicator because, it's just such a, I mean, who wouldn't want to have the chance to sort of say anything that I need? Just computer?
Especially if you get those really big ones like in Prodigy, like we can make a whole shuttlecraft.
That's right.
Yeah, why not?
Totally cool, right? All right. So now what we're going to do is we are going to put you, if you're ready for it, and I hope that you are, because too bad if you're not. I am going to put you on I'm going to give you a little truth serum. I'm going to give you 10 questions, and you got to answer quickly. You ready?
I
Favorite
think so.
flavor? Favorite flavor
I'm
ice cream?
afraid.
Favorite
Sorry?
flavor ice cream?
I don't know, cookies and cream.
Good. Wow. It's funny. Almost every time I ask this, someone says chocolate or vanilla, which shocks me. Okay. Pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Yay.
Yay. All right. Bucket list destination.
Iceland.
Iceland. Okay, cool. Why?
I don't know, just I know a lot of people who've gone there, and the pictures I've seen look amazing. So
Yeah, why is Iceland green and why is Greenland ice? Who knows?
yeah, there's a direct flight also from right here where I am, so easy to get to.
That's what'd you say?
There's a direct flight from here where I live.
Is
so
there
easy
really?
to get to. Yeah,
Direct flight to Iceland.
to Reykjavik. Yeah.
Wow, I guess that's not something that I instinctively would have thought about, but why not, right? Okay, scariest movie you ever saw?
The one that freaked me out as a kid was Total Recall.
Really?
Yeah, that freaked me out a little bit. It was so violent, and I wasn't used to that.
Right, come on, get your ass to Mars. All right, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I mean, first thing that jumped in my head was flying, but I think it's because we were talking about The Boys, and I was thinking about Homelander.
Oh, God, easy.
I actually don't really want to fly though. I don't know why that would be useful. I don't know. That's a tough one.
Pick one.
Yeah, I mean, again, I keep thinking flying, but like, I actually don't want to. I'd probably be scared. I don't want to do that. I'll skip that one.
Oh, all right. Do you play any musical instruments?
Guitar, but not well.
Okay. If you could, would you? Is that the one? If you could play anything, is that the one?
Saxophone.
You play well? Saxophone. Okay. Groovy. You can only have one: wealth or friendship.
Friendship, totally.
Cats or dogs?
I'm allergic to both.
So for you, I guess it's neither.
Neither.
Yeah. All right. So you can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever. Any seat, any venue. What's your choice? Be specific.
Wow. I mean, the first time, like, gosh, what can you imagine, like, seeing like Romeo and Juliet in the Globe Theater when it first came out?
Wow.
Right? That'd be kind of amazing.
Wow. I didn't even think, wow, that's it. All right. So which play?
Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, Romeo and Juliet. Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Last one. All right. So throughout our lifetimes, there are certain, where were you there moments?
Yeah.
Where were you then? What's the most impactful where were you then moment for you?
I mean, the one that I remember, like we'd always talk about when I was like in college and grad school was like the Challenger blowing up kind of thing. Right? And it's usually, unfortunately, it's usually bad moments. It's rarely like, this great moment. It's not like, Obama's inauguration. Nobody says where were you during Obama's inauguration, right? But it's mostly bad things, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, I remember I remember being homesick when the Challenger exploded. And I remember, yeah, and I was just watching like The Price is Right or some horrible TV show. Okay, showed up on there. I missed some of 9/11 just because like I was at work and so I mean somebody came and told me there was something there and I thought it was just like some accident. I didn't find out till significantly later the depth of what had happened. So that it was kind of like this buildup as opposed to a sudden where were you then?
I was in Manhattan that day, so I can't. I couldn't ignore it. So it's quite a day. Yeah, it was quite a day. And for years afterward, I traveled a lot for business, no matter where I went in the country, and I was all over. People found out I was from New York. The first thing, doesn't matter where I was, they wanted to ask about 9/11.
Really? That's not very thoughtful.
Well, it was more like because I was in the city when it happens, and it was one of those unifying moments where everyone was impacted by it. It wasn't mean. They just kind of, because they weren't in the city at the time, and it's something that everyone knows about, and it was so significant. It was an existential crisis, and they were like, "Wow, like, what was it like?" How? And they weren't rude. It was sort of like,
okay, good.
They're asking the one question that I don't want to answer. I didn't want to talk about it.
That's why I was thinking it wasn't very appropriate, because I thought like I'm sure that was very. I mean, I know some other people who are in New York about it, and they very much don't want to talk about it. So
yeah. I mean, thank God. I mean, I was far enough away where I wasn't downtown, but in any case, all right. So. That was great. So we've got some time for some questions.
Oh, good.
So we're going to take some from the audience. What do we got here? Okay, so question for you, Mohammed. Have you ever thought about writing a Star Trek episode or any sci-fi show?
I'm not that creative.
Okay.
But I actually like my current role just fine. I know, for example, Dr. Erin McDonald, who is, like I said, the science advisor for the Star Trek franchise. I know she has expressed interest in actually like writing scripts and things like that. I've never had any interest in doing that. I mean, I like my current role just fine.
Cool.
Like,
Cool.
give me it and I'll do a little tweak for you. I'll give you a little bit of help with it, but like, you can write the whole thing. That's way too much pressure for me.
Yeah. So here's another one. Is there another scientific discipline or branch that you'd love to have expertise in right now, in addition to your biology and genetics?
So, I mean, if it has to be science, I'd probably say cosmology, right? Because I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is really cool in terms of just understanding, space and things like that. So that would be cool. If not science, I mean, I think economics is fascinating. And I took one class in it in college. I kind of wish I'd had some more, but that's not really I mean, unless you're calling it social science.
Right. So actually, I work in, as I mentioned earlier, I work in the real estate business.
Yeah.
And I've been in it for, I don't know, almost 20 years. I can tell you, it's basically like getting in my MBA. In macroeconomics, and you start to really see, when I was younger, I mean, what did I know about economics? Money in, money out, I don't know.
Yeah.
Really see how the pieces work, and like if you really want to get into like structured finance and like bond markets, which is like the math, I can't even do the math, but you start to see how all these very large they're like programs that are at work that are affecting everything across the globe, and we are powerless. Stop it. It's like basically we live inside essentially like a computer program, and we just can't affect the program on an individualized basis. All right. So is there another one? Okay, this is actually one of the questions I had that would have been had they come up randomly. So I'm glad this is here. Is there a specific episode of any Star Trek series that from a scientific standpoint that bugged you enough in its inaccuracy where you'd want to say, guys, let's see if we could fit, this is how we might sort of rectify, if I could go back, is there anyone that you would pick?
Oh yeah. There's a couple of infamous ones. So I mean the one I mentioned for the chase, I mean there's some tweaks to do, but it's not terrible. It just ignores one thing. The one that's I feel like there's a lot that could be done, and let me stress right off the bat, kudos to the person who was the science consultant for this, because I get it. He wasn't a biologist. He was doing his best, and he was like we said, you don't get to say no. So let me give a plug there to my friend Andre Bormanis, because he was on this one. But the Next Generation episode Genesis, where they de-evolve. I think
yeah. Oh god, yeah. That
they de-evolve into all sorts of crazy things. Like, oh.
Yeah, that's a tough one. When you sort of become like this, ancient creature, and then they kind of give you the thing, and then you're kind of completely back, and not only are you physically back, you're not psychologically scarred forever.
Well, and that's the tip of the iceberg too. We don't have we don't have DNA from our ancestors that can make a wholly formed fish or whatever from us, even though we have fish ancestors. Right. I don't have all those fish genes just inside me hanging out. No, they're gone. They're long gone. When I say gone, I mean what's happened is even if some of those genes may still be around, they've been broken up 100 times over, and they're not going to work anymore. It doesn't matter what you turn on or off or anything like that. So that was fraught.
Another question: have you ever helped an author in their understanding of a specific science for their book?
Yes. So actually, there's a service called the Science and Entertainment Exchange. It's sponsored by the National Academies of Sciences, and its goal is to connect book authors as well as showrunners and things like that with scientists to have an opportunity to have a conversation and improve the final product in terms of the accuracy of the science. And I've done that a few times through that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Oh, right on. Okay. All right, folks. So we're getting towards the end here. So I'm going to share my screen, and we got something for you to check out here. So bear with me 1 minute. Here we go. And all right. So Mohammed, what do we got here? Talk to me.
Sure. So this is a book put out by Princeton University Press. They were very kind enough to let me do this. So this is what I mentioned earlier. This essentially covers all the science at a simpler level of the introductory college course, Genetics and Evolution. So it has, basically evidence for evolution, principles of inheritance, basic evolutionary processes, like what is natural selection, talks about the processes of species formation, sexual selection, what are hybrids, things like that. But it's all laid out with each section starting with a scene from a Star Trek episode, then a discussion of the real science, and then coming back to the scene at the end to say what works here, what doesn't work here. It does not require any science background. It's aimed for the general public. And honestly, even if you haven't seen Star Trek, you probably will get most of it because it lays out the scene in enough detail that you can understand what it's talking about. So if you're interested, check it out. It's at your local booksellers.
And in fact, I am interested, and I'm going to buy a copy myself.
No, thank you. But it's at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or local bookstores, whatever you want to frequent. It's at all of them. It's easy to find. If you just Google the name, it'll come right up. Great.
All right. Thanks, Mohammed. All right. As for me, since we're sticking with the sci-fi theme, I'll encourage you guys to check out my space opera Crossline. So Crossline posits modern day space pilot is trusted with testing out new warp thrusters. And if they work, they're going to revolutionize space travel as we know it. But for reasons I will not explain, the pilot is forced through a wormhole, ends up in a parallel Earth where he gets sucked into, he finds himself at a cultural tipping point that he may have been destined for from the beginning. But meanwhile, back on our Earth in the early 1950s, a dead broke gas attendant from Nowheresville, Texas, tumbleweeds and all, stumbles into an oil well, becomes the richest man in the world, uses that wealth to finance that private space program, which launches that original pilot. And when you learn over the course of the novel how their two lives intersect. Crossline is available on Amazon and is published by Crazy 8 Press. And if you want a signed copy, I will be at Shore Leave, July 15th through 17th in Hunt Valley, Maryland. All right, that's our show and our season. I want to thank my guest, Mohammed, for stopping by. This was really a great hour, and I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and I will be taking a break for the summer, but I promise I will be back in September with an all-new season of interviews and panels. And if I don't see you until then, have a great summer. I want to thank everyone. I know there's a bunch of folks who come back every week. Thank you so much for checking it out. Thank you so much for giving your time to Mohammed. And for those coming to Shore Leave in a few weeks, please stop by and say hi. All right, that's my show. That's our season. Take care, everyone. Bye now. All righty. And we are